Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us at Exchange for Media Martech League Fridays. Our topic of discussion today is Programmatic, the future of digital advertising. We have a very eminent panel of speakers today, and I'd like to invite Mr. Akashdeep Batra, who's the SVP and Head of Marketing, DBS Bank, to please take on the conversation. He's our session chair. Thank you so much, Akashdeep, for joining us and for doing this for us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
Thank
All right.
you.
Good morning, everyone. Friday morning, good time to have a discussion about something which is marketing technology, very upcoming. Let me start by thanking everyone. Thank you very much who's joined live, and people who will be seeing this, hopefully after the live session is over. Today we've got what I'll say a perfect panel, to discuss the topic of programmatic advertising, right? We've got Gulrez, who's the Chief Investment and Strategy Officer for Affle. Prajwal, who's the Founder and Chief Product Officer for Zeotap. We also have, the folks from the brand side, right? Top three, marketers in the country itself. Archana, who's VP Media at Airtel. Prachi, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for FBB. And Anand, who's Director of Marketing and Sales and NetMeds. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Okay, let's get started. So, programmatic advertising is not a new concept at all. And, we as marketers have been discussing this topic for over 10 years, right? And I was telling Gulrez, probably my first conversation on programmatic advertising was with him about 10 years back. And, typically when a topic gets discussed for so long, I mean, over such a long period, then either it's hype or it's not understood well, or it's really important. Right. So I think what we're going to do in next 55 minutes is to explore this topic, right? Explore the topic of programmatic advertising. Especially we'll look at, the challenges that everyone faces today. What are the opportunities for tomorrow? And, what is that you can take away, and take back to your daily jobs and how you can be better at this field, right? Again, the other thing is programmatic, like a lot of other concepts in digital advertising world, is defined very differently depending on who you're talking to, right? And this is definitely one topic. So let me kind of, start with defining what the context is, right? And, get that out of the way so that there's no confusion about what we're talking about. See, at a very concept level, like the word says, programmatic advertising is about automated buying and selling on digital, obviously. In its purest form, it involves an ad exchange, which means multiple buyers and sellers on the same platform buying ads on a regular basis. And the two is that this buying and selling happens on a real-time basis, or what is called real-time bidding as a technical term, right? However, with this definitions, a lot of platforms or networks are out of programmatic advertising, right? For example, Facebook is a good example. Amazon's a good example because they're kind of walled gardens and they manage all their ad supply side and demand side themselves, right? So at a purest form, they're not. But just for the context of this discussion, I still want to stick to the definition of programmatic being automated buying and selling of ads, right? And irrespective of whether it happens over an ad network or an ad exchange. So kind of just broadens the scope for us to have a good conversation, right? So let me start, right? And let me start with kind of setting a little bit of getting a little bit of a background about, how this field has actually evolved over the last few years. And, specifically what's the almost global situation and how brands have been using programmatic and, what's the current state in India. So let me start with Gulrez. Gulrez, from the, given you've spent a lot of time on this and you've had global roles, managing, a lot of areas in the space of digital advertising. Give me a sense of what you feel is where programmatic has come today, and both from a global perspective and an India perspective.
Thanks, Akash. Let me also, before I give you the global perspective and the situation in India, let me add one element to the definition that you mentioned. Programmatic, we've over-complexed the programmatic advertising by using a lot of jargons, and I'm glad that you used a simple definition, which is buying and selling of media, which is automated. There's one more key element which is missing in the definition is using data. Yeah, that's super important for programmatic. Now, if I do a audience poll, or let's say even a panel poll, that how many of us are using programmatic advertising versus how many of us are using remarketing, right? I'm sure the numbers would be much higher for remarketing, but we don't realize that even remarketing is programmatic advertising, right? What is remarketing? You've got a signal, a data signal that our desired consumer or a prospect has not taken a particular action, and using that data, you're targeting the customer again on the inventory available, right? That's a purest form of programmatic advertising. What we don't realize is that all of us are using remarketing, but we're still shying away from programmatic. We've categorized programmatic, as the things for, let's say, bigger advertisers, and it's very complex. If I can draw a funny parallel on a lighter note, I'm sure all of us have seen the movie Three Idiots, right? There was a scene where Amir Khan is trying to explain what machine is in a very simple language, but the professor doesn't agree with him. That's exactly programmatic, right? In very simple form, it's programmatic, it's buying and selling of media via automation using data signals. To give you a global context, I'm sure all of us know that last year, P&G moved away from the traditional forms of buying media, including Facebook, and moved to 100% programmatic. Another example would be Unilever. They have a dedicated team, although that's an agency, which is called Ultra at Mindshare. Netflix, Reckitt Benckiser, I think all of them have the dedicated selling arms of programmatic advertising. And if I talk about, let's say, the developed market in US itself, I think 80% of the digital media is done using the programmatic, which is largely automation. If I come back to India, there are two issues. Very simple. There are two issues. I call them legacy and perception. Legacy is how we started programmatic in India, which is in India specifically, programmatic was used to sell the unsold remnant inventory, right? Some of the advertiser is still carrying that perception that it's only the remnant inventory and not useful for me. And the perception is that either it's for the large brands or involves a huge amount of money, or it's not for a smaller brand or medium-sized brand. So these are the two biggest issues from my perspective when it comes to context in India.
Got it. Thanks, Gurrez. Like always in all panel discussions, marketers are kind of positioned as not the smartest one in the room, and obviously not the ones who understand things easily and and are tough cookies to crack for you guys. But I'll take that point. Prajal, and I want you to weigh in on this topic. I think again with the perspective that you have, and if there's also a little bit more contrast that you can bring in on a marketer's mindset in, for example, in the US and in India, and how do you see that impacting the choices that marketers are making in terms of programmatic buying? Prajal?
Yeah, thanks, Akashdeep. So very much echo Gulrez's positions here. If you look at the genesis of programmatic at the turn of the millennium with Right Media, which was arguably the first ad exchange, it brought with it promises of scale, number one, which was much easier to transact at high volumes than going direct. It brought with it promises of precision to some extent on the back of these data-driven signals that Gulrez mentioned. And it brought with it a promise of accountability in some respects, because there was this ability, thanks to these data signals, thanks to these identifiers that were being transmitted, there was this ability to trace the journey, the workflow, right from the impression through to whatever downstream action you were looking at, and then close the loop to some extent. And what that gave rise to was a certain degree of control that marketers had, both buyers and sellers, that they hadn't had previously. To answer your question specifically, I think the primary difference is the stigma in some respects that Gulrez alluded to in India around programmatic being remnant, or being basically a platform for inventory that's not sold direct. Whereas from our perch at a global level in the Western markets, programmatic is very much the norm, not the exception. And to Gulrez's point, it spans everything, every touch point across a marketer's journey. Increasingly today, with all the upheaval in the landscape around identity and identifiers, with third-party cookies, with Apple's announcement from earlier on the IDFA, which to some extent has a lesser impact in India, but could serve as a bellwether for changes in the Android ecosystem as well that Google might implement in the future, as has been the case in the past, there is a certain, I'd say, paranoia around what the future of the ecosystem could be. And that, by the way, is common across the global landscape. It's possible that some efforts in the Western markets are further along than in India, but the sense of panic around identity certainly is homogenous.
No, got it. I appreciate it. And I actually now want to bring sort of say the other side of the table, and Archana, if I may start with you, and I want to kind of you to give us a perspective about how you've been leveraging programmatic, and also kind of bring about some challenges that you face, which kind of brings a little bit of a counter of what Gulrez and Prajwal said in saying that there isn't necessarily, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, a good understanding of this area for the marketers itself, right? So Archana, your views, please.
Yeah, so actually, we've been using some portion of our budgets go into programmatic, and we've been doing this for the last few years. And obviously it's been a journey in terms of learning and understanding. So all the challenges that I talk about are based on my learnings and our journey at Airtel on programmatic, right? The reason we've started using programmatic is, I'm looking at largely doing brand digital, which is trying to get drive awareness and consideration for the brand, right? That's the focus that's what I do. And in that journey, and we do know that with walled gardens and with buying specific individual sites, you're actually maybe reaching the same consumer multiple number of times. And while on television and other media, you can put a cut on the number of exposures that you do to the consumer. It was very difficult to do that on digital. And for us, that's where programmatic really helped. We could actually maximize reach and at a frequency level, because for an audience buying, we could do that, and we would try to eliminate as much of waste. And I think that's one of the reasons we started experimenting, saying how do we reduce and look at getting to the optimal frequency that we want the consumer to see, and then move the rest of the budgets to maybe a new audience segment or a new cohort who's so those were some of the reasons that we started. And actually our budgets have just gone up because we've seen the value that comes in. I think, so that was the one part of why we went on to and how it's working, and it's still working for us. It gives us some of the lowest cost per reach, and we are able to manage frequency, right? So that's something which is like really worked for us. The things, the challenges that we've seen, right, over time is, I think the first challenge we discovered was, we actually wanted to see a listing of sites and what's the kind of impressions we generated on each of these sites. And one of the things we realized was, this was some time back, it's not very recent, but yeah, that actually there were some 2 or 3 platforms which were getting the maximum impressions. And we were actually buying one of those platforms separately also, like, because we obviously all our monies was not. And that's when we realized that maybe we need to keep a check of that, because there's no point in buying that platform separately if there's a huge amount of inventory coming out from programmatic. So that was one of the big challenges and learnings that we had on the way, in terms of saying that this is something which I feel that, as marketers, we need to keep evaluating to see that is the inventory, if it's going onto one specific site or a large chunk of it is going, hopefully you're not buying it separately. And, maybe that's how you manage your overall media, digital plans on this. I think the second piece was this whole thing on publisher accountability. Today, when you go and buy something from Facebook, or say even some of the news sites and stuff like that, if it's not performing, you can actually go back and have a conversation with them and figure out how do you tweak this, how do you make this better. That is one challenge that I find, which we are facing, that there is no accountability in terms of saying what's delivering, and further, if I add to it, what's delivering, what's not delivering, right? Can I eliminate the waste, right? So we don't know. And there is, if I go and buy, let's assume, programmatically, I go and buy news, right? And I don't know which of these sites are working versus when I go individually to each of them, right? That's one. The second piece, both on, let me talk about viewability and brand safety, right? For us, that's very critical. On brand viewability, we've seen that we've just done some pilots with some of the viewable, people who do this whole test the viewability pieces. And we've seen that the viewability on programmatic is slightly, lower than what you buy regularly, right? So that is a challenge. From a brand safety standpoint, we've seen some of, even after having all the filters in place of saying we don't want our ads on certain, there are chances of it going onto slightly brand unsafe content. Now, those are borderline gray areas, but as a brand to driving awareness, we don't really want those. So right now we're actually working on as to how do we improve the filters and stuff like that. Yeah. I think the other piece in my mind is, there's some level of lack of transparency. And what we've also seen, if I just purely look at it from a CTR and engagement standpoint, if I look at it, the CTRs are slightly lower on programmatic. That's what we've seen, right? And but if I look at it from a reach standpoint, this is one of the lowest cost per reach platform. Programmatic gives me the lowest cost per reach. But if I'm looking at, driving traffic to my websites and to my apps and all, I've seen it being slightly lower than, and again, going back to my first point, I don't know what works. Which ones are the ones which are driving? How do we get platforms to help us improve that? Because that's what we're all looking at. No, it's actually like a black box, right? The other piece is, so accountability, the viewability piece, and the brand safety. There is a lot of long tail in it. I know we do talk about the fact that this is about audience buying, and that's the audience where it is. But yes, there is a huge amount of long tail. If I've once tried to scroll through the number of sites that my ads have happened on, and it's been a really, really long list. And what we can't do is we can't go back and increase the budgets on sites or platforms which are working versus which are not working in this from a programmatic standpoint. And I think some level of transparency on what's working, how do we eliminate, all of that, I think becomes really critical. At least that's been something which we've looked at.
No, John, I find it interesting, and I'm going to call that out. And if you look at it, both Gulrez and Prajwal started the conversation with saying that one of the big promises of programmatic was transparency. And 4 out of 6 areas that you mentioned as challenges are related to transparency. So I'm going to actually revisit that point. But I do want to go to Prachi and saying, Prachi, obviously with the area that you're focusing on, digital is probably one of the primary mediums that you use. I know you do a lot of TV as well. But from your perspectives, how are you seeing, transparency definitely as a challenge, but, I also want to explore your views on the cost issue, right? And that's one area which, Archana didn't mention. She covered most of the other issues, but what's your view on how are you leveraging this? And if there's a perspective on the cost issue of using programmatic versus some of the other platforms?
So I'll take it up from 2 spaces wherein we have pain points and what is it that we have experienced as a brand and in various categories like fashion, beauty. And Archana covered most of the pain points that we as brands face and inside out. So I'll take it from 2 perspectives. First is to what are the primary challenges apart from the real issue of being on the platform and being how is the tool operating for us. The first challenge, as Gulrez and Prajwal mentioned, definitely is the understanding of this tool is still in extreme gray areas. And it's not only marketers. Look at the entire decision-making platform. First, it's the performance marketers who you have to basically approach, like Prajwal or Gulrez will understand this way better than anybody else. And then the performance marketers coming to people like you, me, Archana, and making us convinced on this entire tool. And then us making a business case out of it and being able to convince the larger management saying that, okay, let's now focus on putting our money to this space. Maybe we will start getting results. And that's when the cost conversation starts floating in, and it floats in big and strong. A brand like us, we have flirted, and as Archana was also mentioning, we have definitely flirted with this tool for quite some time, and cost has been an issue, and I will absolutely, it's a raw nerve to touch. When we start working, and Gulrez, to your point of remarketing, when we started moving our budgets from remarketing to programmatic, we started we were taken aback by surprise. 2 years back, when we started working on this tool, we were actually taken aback by surprise at how costly can it become. We definitely had a plan for the reach, but it was striking us hard at that point of time. We were at it for about I think about a month or so for us to be able to absorb the entire nuances of how the money is going to get optimized over a period of time. When we started opening up various other cohorts, and when we started the inflow of transactions started happening, that's when I think people like me, you, and our bosses will get convinced, saying that, okay, let's start floating money around here, because this is looking like a space where in the see you can use as many jargons, and we have established that at the beginning of the session, as many jargons as possible. At the end of the day, please show me the cost per transaction is the right that's the ask on table, and that's where you and me come across, and we have to convince somebody over us, saying that, okay, this is where I want to launch up. So for campaigns, for hero campaigns, I've seen this working because hero campaigns tend to scroll for a little longer period of time. Hence, it works from that perspective. I'll come to brand building when we touch that point. But for us, when we have ever put money from a tactical point of view, if it's not a long campaign, then definitely the cost hits us hard. If it's a hero campaign, then that's when the cost optimization starts building up. And I'll come back with examples when we start floating them. But the cost issue is a paramount issue that we as a brand have experienced over the past 2.5 years.
Got it. And I think I do want to, I've picked up two important points that you mentioned, is the overall lack of understanding, both at the agency side and at the marketer side. And I think, I think the other thing that you mentioned was about, making sure the cost makes sense for both smaller and larger campaigns, right?
True.
So appreciate it, Prachi. So Anand, I'll come to you as a sort of say final voice on this, on this topic. And Anand, I also want you to weigh in a little bit on the performance side as well, because I know you're focusing on both the topics in your day-to-day. So talk to us a little bit about how you've been leveraging this, both for performance and brands, and what are some of the challenges that you've been facing so far?
Right. So, I mean, thank you, Akash, and to all the panelists. I think very little is left for me. So I will try to, bring in some kind of insights here. So, I'll just start with this. Imagine for a second, if you were told that you cannot advertise on two of the biggest platforms in the world, which is Google and Facebook. Challenging, right? But if you see in the current scenario in 2020, it's not as challenging as it was in 2015 when we started NetMeds. And you must be wondering why I'm saying that. Exactly, that was the situation. Since, online pharmacy being at the niche category, it was the first time that we moved into this line. And the platform had no idea, because of some kind of repulsion effect from the Western country. They had a policy in India that you cannot advertise any pharmaceutical product on these platforms. So those days, you did not have much choice to, choose and segmentize your consumer and reach out to them. So it was a big challenge for us those days. But what happened is, one good thing happened, strategically, our CEO, Mr. Pradeep Dada, started with the vision that, we don't want to start doing hyper-local. Let's go pan-India delivery right from day one. So that was one of the good thing for us, that, we went into the ATL, and especially I'm not promoting any medium. Of course, digital is great, and anybody can, it's a good starter for anybody with any smaller amount to the bigger amount. But of course, the TV side of investment is larger, but it worked for us in such a way that, because of it reaches to the larger extent of the country. That's where, we started getting traction, building the brand, and then we started slowly getting into the digital way of wherever we can acquire customer. And again, that it was a completely a blank slate online pharmacy, industry in India, because the buying behavior of the consumer was completely offline, right? And we started with the new offering that, hey, you can buy now medicine also online. So 2015, you could buy everything, but, of course, medicines you couldn't buy here. So it was a completely a niche category in India. So, due course of time, things started opening up. And even now today, we are advertising on these platforms. And of course, we have tried programmatic as a category. And we use it for, branding and performance both. And what the kind of, the bottleneck or the mindset problem the brand has today is that, that most of the money that we spent on the video advertising through programmatic. And what we saw there was, that if you are running individually the programmatic branding campaign, it is not good in terms of the engagement or whatever, because, you are putting that thing in the people's mind that, you could buy medicine online, or you are showcasing your service, but that's not leading to the transaction. So then, we were running sometimes parallelly programmatic branding campaign and performance campaign. What we did is, when we were running the the performance campaign, we gave a support of this programmatic branding campaign. And what we saw, we were not kind of seeing what actually is happening. What we did is, we turned it off, and we saw our transaction going down by good percentage. And that delta was for us, which is a supporting from the branding campaign to the transaction performance campaign. So that's where we derive the result of this, that it works in such a way, because the branding on top of the funnel, that you try to create the kind of awareness, but the performance is that Prachi was saying that at the end of the day, we are startup and we are answerable that what is your customer acquisition cost, right? And any advertising that you are going to spend money, you are also driving your existing back, and you are also driving your new customer. But then you have to keep in the control of this CAC as a variable, and that's a kind of very challenging situation, especially in the startup ecosystem, because you are questioned by left, right, center, everybody, right from the investor, that what is your CAC that you're driving the acquisition, and then accordingly you have to drive that LTV, and then you have to make sure that when this customer become profitable to you. So the bottleneck and the mindset challenge is there, and again, I would call it that, like YouTube has done amazing job in terms of like what YouTube Director Mix does, amazing work, AI ML kind of work they have done. But apart from this two bigos, the other platforms are kind of very seculated, and it's a requirement of like Gulrez and Prajol to educate the lot of these leaders and from the branding side to explain that that how it works. Like even we were not in the believer side of it can drive the performance, but when we experimented with this two parallel thing, we saw that actually it works. So that's like actual experiment that we have done, and we would like to share with you guys.
Anand, appreciate it. And I think the feedback about leveraging programmatic for a sort of say full funnel impact and making sure both of them are done synchronously, helping the consumer traverse the funnel rather than just focusing either on top of the funnel or bottom of the funnel. So I think that's a great insight. So Gulrez, Prajal, I want to come back to you. And I was actually thinking I'm going to ask you a few more tough questions, but I think my co-panelists have already done a pretty good job of that. It seems to be a difficult situation for you guys to be in, right? And I think, and I want to give you guys a few minutes to, kind of almost respond to, a few points. And I think, to me, one of the big points continues to be Facebook and Google, or Facebook, Amazon, Google, some part of Google, and the rest of the ecosystem, right? And I'm sure that's a question that gets asked all the time. The transparency challenge that everyone alluded to gets addressed there. There are still questions on this sort of say wild west, and I don't know what's happening. Archana mentioned I might see a sense of lists, brand safety, viewability. These are the issues which kind of get addressed by the Facebooks and Googles of the world, right? And I think the other point that I want you to mention while you explain this is, and I want to spend the rest of the 15-20 minutes just focusing on data signals, and if you can touch upon the fact that the data signals today that are available with Facebook or Amazon, for example, I mean, Google's a little bit of a mix, so it's not always best to refer to them. I mean, they're phenomenally better, right? I mean, just you look at them at time spent, look at the connections, look at what they're buying, and so on and so forth. So from a conceptual paper perspective, if I see it on a piece of paper, the data signals that they get are far better. And the technology that they have, given the focus, is much better versus not just you guys, but even publishers don't necessarily have that capability to drive so much of insights, which can be aggregated at certain levels and therefore delivered to marketers for usage. So Gulrez, Prajwal, request you to come back and tell us why there is still hope in looking at non-large platforms to leverage them for programmatic buying.
I'm going to try and hold the salesperson back in me and try and give a different perspective. I noticed that Archana mentioned two of the biggest issues were long tail and transparency, right? Let me come back to the earlier thing that I mentioned about the understanding of programmatic. How I define it, programmatic has 4 arms to it. One is called real-time bidding, which is done for the long tail that she mentioned. However, there are 3 more arms. One is called private marketplace, the second is called preferred deals, and the third is called programmatic guarantee. So what you can do is when you're running real-time bidding across the long tail, figure out what is working for you, what site, what app is working for you, and do a private deal with them or do a PG deal with them, because you already established that that particular genre, that particular category of the apps, or that particular content works for you, right? And in simple terms, we call it hypothesis testing as well, that you open the audience or the ads to a larger audience, figure out what works for you and try and simplify and target to that audience. Another point about transparency, I think the very purpose of creating programmatic was to have transparency, right? In 2010, you imagine that there were only very few sites you could advertise on, right? And the number has exponentially increased today. Now imagine if earlier you were sending 10 IOs to these sites, now you're working or advertising on 1,000 sites. Imagine the pain of an agency or a media planner to send 1,000 IOs, right? It's practically impossible to do that. And that is the reason why transparency comes into the picture, that you have visibility on what is working for you. And as I said, Archana, figure out which is the right platform. There's a lot of transparency till the impression and the bid level that you can get, right? There is 100% transparent platforms available. Just figure out what works for you. On your point about, Akash, about data signal and who has the best quality of data signal, right? When you talk about Google and Facebook or Amazon, they have an important data signal that most of other platforms don't have, which is the post-login information. When you are signing up with Gmail or Amazon, you're giving a lot of demographic information about yourself willingly, right? Your gender, your age, possibly other details. And that is the signal available with these platforms. However, I want to step back and define data signals into 3 categories, which I'm sure all of us know. One is the first party, which the brand owner. Second is the second party, which is, let's say, a mediator like us, an agency or a network, which we get on behalf of the brand. And third party is pure, let's say, data companies, which has information about the user and they sell the data about you, right? Now, I would contradict the statement that Akash mentioned that would a single platform, whether it's Facebook or Amazon, has more information, more signals about a particular consumer versus people like consolidators like us, right? And as I said, I want to hold back the salesperson in me, but we've got the largest amount of data about connected devices in India, right? And because we work with wide range of advertisers, we're getting all those signals. Right? You get the signal for the advertiser, you get the signal when you're opening the bid to an exchange, so you get a lot of data signal. So I would say for any network or for any consolidator, the amount of data signals, if done in the correct manner, the consolidation of this and the usage of this would be huge, right? Because a particular platform, whether it's Amazon or a Google or a Facebook, would obviously have an advantage on deterministic data, which is post-login data. But when a consolidation happens, there's a lot more information, there's a lot more consumption and content habits that we have. Totally agree that it's probabilistic in nature, but a lot more signals about that particular audience. And I'm sure Prajwal can add to that.
Prajwal, what's your view on the quality of data signals?
So I have a few thoughts on the discussion so far. And Akash, I know you were hoping for a feisty discussion, so I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. and say that I take umbrage to the distinction between brand and performance as these two distinct worlds that are dramatically different from each other. I think at the end of the day, you're looking at generating tofu top of funnel, and that's typically associated with brand, and you're looking at bofu bottom of funnel, and that's typically associated with performance. And they seem to be treated as two different entities, but ultimately, especially in the current economic climate, you want to move product. To Prachi's point, you're looking at transactions. It doesn't matter whether you're a P&G or a Unilever or a Future Group or a NetMeds. If you're not driving outcomes, it doesn't matter what you're doing at various stages of the funnel. And to Gulrez's point, programmatic addresses all the different stages of the funnel, or can, if used correctly. So I don't think it should be relegated to one category or the other. I think it is applicable across the board. In the US, for example, almost 50-60% of TV is bought programmatically now. Addressable TV, it's not linear TV anymore. So there is a certain applicability of the idea of programmatic across the board. As far as the walled gardens are concerned, I think they are definitely a very easy starting point for marketers, certainly, but they come with two constraints. And this, I say this from my own personal experience as a marketer. I'm on the board. I was one of the founders of a direct-to-consumer women's wellness startup in Mumbai called NUA. They sell sanitary pads direct-to-consumer. So it's an area where traditional consumption has been very much offline, and NUA turned it on its head by selling sanitary pads direct-to-consumer via the web. And of course, Facebook was a very easy starting point, as has been traditionally for these direct-to-consumer brands. But there very much the focus was both on brand as well as performance. It is very important to present a very curated, well thought out image of NUA to consumers, but it was equally important as a startup brand strapped for cash to drive sales, to drive transactions. So it wasn't that it was one or the other. The other thing we realized with Facebook, as with Google, is the two constraints I was going to come to was that first, you saturate very easily, very quickly, and you need to look at diversification. The second is, as a marketer, there is limited control over what you can do on those platforms. And the more sophisticated you get in your marketing journey, the more you want to build in-house capabilities around data, around these signals. And there, it's incumbent on you to look at domains outside of Facebook and Google. Finally, I think on the point on data signals, I don't necessarily believe that one domain, one platform has the best signal sort of carte blanche across the board. I think signals need to drive outcomes. You could very well make the argument that Anand is sitting on a much stronger corpus of pharmacy or medicine-oriented signals than a Google or a Facebook. Equally, you could make the argument that Prachi is sitting on a much healthier corpus of beauty and cosmetics-oriented signals, for example, than a Google or a Facebook. So it's a function of what you're looking to achieve, what the outcome is, and then taking decisions, looking at signals based on those outcomes.
No, makes sense. No, I appreciate it. So I'm actually going to use this topic to kind of pivot into the next one, which is related to data. And I know Gulrez kind of mentioned first party, second party, third party, and I think, and Prajal, you mentioned that as well, right? I think from a traditional perspective, mass marketers typically had not necessarily cared so much about data because the intention largely has been to reach as many people as you can, right, in your target audience or in your consumption audience, right? So I think the discussion again on first party data has been sort of say in the headlines for quite some time now, right? Again, and again, the context programmatic being, and Gulrez started, Prajal, you've added, saying the amount of data that you can generate yourself will eventually define how competitive you are in the market, right? Because fundamentally, one of the challenges, and speaking on your behalf, Facebook and Google do allow to kind of sort of say make everything table stakes, right? So I have the same data accessible which my competitor will have, right? So I want to start with Anand, with you on this point. The fact that you have a lot of data yourself about customer behavior, and your ability to use that first party data to either engage with the same audience or go after lookalike audiences or go after people who you believe will be have had some interaction with you, but you want to drive more engagement, right? So Anand, what's your view on first party data leveraging it in the context of programmatic buying?
Right. So see, Akash, we are basically in healthcare, and the data is here very precious and very personal to individual. So we take the privacy to the larger extent here. But however, to drive the value to us in terms of the first party data, we reach out in terms of remarketing for sure, and then for churning the older customer back, right? So like the people who have not transacted for a certain period of time. So like we started Netmeds deciding that with multiple assumptions, because we did not have anything any data available to understand that what is going to work, what is not going to work. So whatever data that currently we get it, so the primary objective is that that we have to churn our existing base and bring them back. So there are two ways for it. One is that within our ecosystem, so like we have our own, not on, but of course rented platform for the personalization. So we reach out to our existing base based on their buying behavior on the real time or based on the time frame. And the larger picture is that when these people are not in my ecosystem and they are everywhere else. So whether they are on Facebook, they are on Google, or they are consuming content, they are consuming news, they are on video sites, they are on OTT platform or wherever. So the idea is that one thing is that you have to keep, we should not allow them to forget that, you were our customer and we still keep on reminding you that, hey, you transacted us at Netmeds. So one of the biggest challenges that we have currently is that, we deal with medicines and you cannot suggest somebody anything, right? I can't suggest you that you take this medicine. So our communication goes very unified that, that it still goes in the straight line that, buy medicine online, or you come and maybe you haven't transacted for this time. So the communication goes very well. So that's where we saw the challenge that, you can't have any information coming back from the system and presenting in front of you that, hey, last time you bought diabetes medicine or hypertension or this, why don't you go and buy? You can't do that, right? You'll be completely screwed up. So that's where we launched this ancillary category, which is like a wellness, OTC, Ayush, homeopathy, and all these things. Apart from that, we have a doctor consultation, lab test, all this, and there the data can be like, if you have come to Netmeds and you try to search, let's say, some beauty product. We have two ladies here. So if they have searched some beauty product or wellness product, now if they are going anywhere out of our ecosystem, one thing I will be doing that, if they haven't transacted, it was a window shopping, I will be trying to reach them by any communication method that is available to us, which is an email, SMS, push notification and all. And then we use all these pixels back in the ecosystem of OTT or programmatic platform and make sure that we are reaching to these guys and we are able to bring them back and increase on the transaction side.
Super. I'd just like to, you'll be surprised how much beauty products Gulrez and Prajol spend on. But okay, let me, Prachi, if I have to ask you this question with the perspective of the need for you, again, you've got enough and more shopper data as well, right? And in your mind, how critical is it becoming in your overall, sort of say media marketing strategy to leverage that data to deliver messages to your customers?
So huge. I mean, the maths was explained by Anand very well. So not that the maths is going to change for me, but yes, what I am as a hypermarket able to do is model this behavioral intents into my hard selling data and throw them related categories or unrelated categories depending on whatever they're consuming outside my platform. Apart from that, I think the first question that most of us need to answer, outside of digital natives, how much of this data is clean data? When we are triggering with this data, flirting with this data, whether it's a lapser, whether it's an active consumer, whether it's a consumer I am trying to capture for some other category, how much of this data is a clean data? Look at us. We have been collecting data manually 20 years, since the past 20 years of us being. Then maybe it graduated to capturing it on Excel sheets, and then finally whatever mode of new tools we are employing at this point of time and capturing it. Look at the data, clean data available for us to be able to flirt around with. That's the first question. In any first party data which dates back more than 5-6 years, the sanity or quality of the data has to be first of all questioned. Second is the usage of this data. As I said, unrelated categories, throwing behavioral intent at over and above the hard black and white data that we have, has been a hypermarket strategy. And even if it's a beauty customer and an unrelated category like a food or a kids category might be getting thrown at me, is absolutely something that we use, and it has seen a lot of transactional cost being brought down from our end. We have been very actively and very mathematically being able to use this data, employing all and more of the tools that Anand has explained just now.
But Arjuna, if you want to weigh in on, and also kind of point out to if you've, leveraged, more, sort of say hyper targeting, leveraging even second party or third party data. Arjuna?
Yeah, so we've looked at more of the second party and a little bit of the third party data. For branding campaigns, we rarely use the first party data because the objective is always to target newer consumers, get more people onto, and drive awareness among a larger segment of audiences, right? So we've done a lot of things like, lookalikes and custom cohorts and things like that. And especially for certain campaigns, which are very recurring, like, obviously now it doesn't, it's not relevant anymore, but like, for example, international roaming, right? That's a campaign you want to keep targeting to an audience who's constantly, who's going to go abroad or who's going to go travel very soon. And, so we've kind of used a lot of those kind of creating lookalikes, because you'll never get the exact consumer who's actually going to be. And it's a cohort that you can't target. You can't talk to everybody because it's going to be to a lot of audiences, it's going to be irrelevant communication. It's only going to be relevant to an audience who's actually about to travel in the next, month or so, or less than that. So for us, that, we look at signals as to how do we get that signal of the fact that this consumer is planning to travel or is about to travel. And that's where, so I've just given one example of what we've done. A lot of our other campaigns, as I said, from a branding standpoint, are typically, creating a larger reach and driving awareness. So that's where, I just wanted to talk about one point that Gulrez mentioned on the whole transparency piece, right? I don't, when I'm talking about transparency, the transparency also talks about, things like, where's my ad getting placed? As I said, I'm looking at purely from a driving awareness standpoint, right? While obviously there is, everything has to drive into a business outcome, but my focus is largely about creating awareness. Where is the placement? Is it in the first scroll, second scroll? What's the size of advertising? Like, one of the things we try to do is we don't buy smaller sizes on programmatic. We try to look at big, because that's always been my concern about a small size ad on a phone. What is going to be visible? Is my communication even going to be visible? So that's one of the things that we do. But that, in my mind, is something which, and that's where we talk about transparency. One, yes, there is a long tail, which I think you said some stuff on in terms of, figuring out. But given the way internet has exploded, and there are new platforms coming up every other day, it's really difficult to keep track of everything. Obviously, then you start limiting the number of things that you bid on and the number of sites, platforms that you bid on. But then that defeats the purpose of programmatic. So while it's a double-edged sword in my mind, right? How do you at the same time get the benefit of programmatic, but at the same time try to balance the issues in terms of placements, in terms of the sizes of the ads and all. I always say this, that when it came into our lives, it was supposed to be the most measured medium per se. But there are so many, acronyms and so many different ways that you can, buy this medium, that it gets really, you buy it on CPM, CTRs, cost per lead. It's just, there's just not one metric that you can look at and say, okay, this is the metric I want to buy it on. And every platform is now, being available on the same metric. I think for me, that also becomes a big challenge, because then it becomes very difficult to, look at comparing how platforms are performing. I'll give you an example on every platform's own definition of what size of the video that they will charge. The cost per view will be on 30 seconds. And some are like, let's take, Facebook talks about 3 seconds, or TikTok also talks about, say, 1 second view. As per them, it works. I always wonder, if I have a long format video, which is beyond 30 seconds, why am I even evaluating something on 30 seconds, right? And so what we do is we actually convert everything back to the size, the duration of my video, and the cost I have paid to actually get people to see the full video, to see, and then make a comparison. Because comparison, and we saw certain sites which looked at 3 second videos and 1 second videos suddenly were most cost effective, but they may not have got my message, because I'm looking at long format advertising. If I'm looking at short format, yes, maybe. But if I'm looking at long format, it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's where I find a lot of challenges in terms of even.
Sure.
Akash, I wanted to come in. Akash, I want to come in.
Yeah, Anand.
So there is a famous saying by one American marketeer. He says, I know 50% of my budget is actually waste, but I don't know which part of the 50%.
Yeah, no, I think I just Arjuna, I think valid points. I think there are even enough and more tools now available which allow you to even help you with viewability and brand safety and so on and so forth. But again, adds to the cost. And I'm hoping to get to that point. But before that, Prajal and Gulrez, and I want you to feel free to wear your sales hat as well, and almost give recommendations to a marketer on the panel or otherwise, specifically on managing data, right? And not just managing, leveraging data, right? I think first party data, Prachi mentioned, the challenge typically is you might have a lot of data, but how much is it usable, right? And then obviously, there was this discussion about the quality of second party, third party data is always, not necessarily as effective, right? So there are still these challenges that most marketers are dealing with. And I know both of you come with a lot of expertise around data, right? So I just want you to use this time, I mean, not even, rebutting any of the statements that anyone else made, but, recommendations from your perspectives that marketers, either on the panel or as attendees or who people who see this later, take that back and start applying them in their day-to-day lives. Prajal, you want to start with?
Sure, Akash. So actually, it's interesting that all these conversations around first-party data, because the change in marketer perspective has been reflected almost directly in our product stack. 6 years ago, when we started the business, the majority of the conversations around data were in the context of third parties. So marketers had this sort of arm's length relationship with data assets that they didn't really engage with directly, but they used for the purposes of media buying and such. Today, that's changed dramatically on its head. The conversation starts with first party first. And so the conversation as far as our product portfolio starts with something called the CDP, a customer data platform, which is in some respects a successor to the DMP of Pure, but more specifically, I think, is basically a platform that allows you to unify first-party data across siloed sources, build a common taxonomy, build a unified customer view, build what is known as the canonical ID in this context, which is a unique customer ID, build out a private identity graph, which is basically, if you have customers that log in on different properties across different channels, how can you pool all those identifiers into a single customer view so that you can have that luxury of addressability across different channels and yet have a consistent messaging across them. So all of these conversations are now at the forefront, especially so in the American and Western European markets, increasingly so in India as well, but most typically with other more with the larger brands, the more sophisticated marketers. But what I will also say is this is true of clients across the board, across the spectrum, ranging from those that are sitting on huge piles of first-party data, such as the telecoms of the world, the Airtels and the NetMeds or the retail-oriented companies, to those such as automotive who have historically not had a wealth of first-party data, but are now actively looking to inculcate these assets because they realize that sophistication in marketing, the achievement of these outcomes starts by looking at first party first. So if there's one recommendation I would have, I would say look at CDPs as the entry point. And in terms of philosophy, I would say, and I've said this before, start with outcomes. Start with looking at what is it that you actually want to achieve. And data is just a conduit to that eventual goal. Data is not an objective in and of itself.
Thanks, Rajal. Makes sense. Gulrez, a quick couple of minutes on that, please.
Sure, and I'm glad that Prajwal mentioned about the DMP and the CDP. I would say that, and I also touch upon one of the questions that audience has asked. There are two types of CDP or the information that you're looking in a CDP or a DMP. One is cookie based, right, which is the traditional way of doing programmatic. However, the other is based on the device IDs, right, which is the mobile app world we live in, right. On the app advertising, you don't have a cookie, right? The cookie doesn't exist. It's based on the device ID, which normally doesn't change over a period of time. And it based on the signals that we get from that particular device, right? So no recommendation, but for the advertiser and the audience in the panel, audience, I would suggest go for something that can provide you a consolidated view. I mean, we are doing a number of projects where we are, for one of the largest advertisers in India, we're trying to map the cookie that they have collected in the last 5 years, because that's the information on the web, with the information that's available or the device IDs that are available in the app economy, right? Is there a way you can build what Prajwal mentioned about the unique identifier? We call it the universal ID, right? How can you get that single view of the customer across the web and the app world? We all know that the cookie is gonna, be going away, right? So what does the future look like in a cookie-less world? Can we rely on the app economy and the signal that it provides? For all the advertisers I would look at the platform which can give you this unified picture of the consumer based on cookie and the device ID mix.
Super. I think I just want to touch upon one point, and happy to anyone for anyone to actually jump in. See, one of the challenges with the complexity of the whole ecosystem, and Archana touched upon it, is the fact that there's a need for multiple tools and technologies, right? So, I mean, you ever having conversations about how CMOs are, fundamentally becoming more of, CIOs or CTOs, because just the amount of investment that they need to make on tools and platforms, right? See, but one is obviously the complexity. So I think Gulrez, Prajwal, the understanding challenge one comes from there, right? So I mean, conceptually, I'm sure everyone on the panel otherwise as well agrees with the fact that there's definitely definite value and so on and so forth, but the execution challenges is just so much, right? That's one part. The second larger issue, which again touches upon what everyone talked about, Anand and Prachi mentioned that quite a bit, about the fact that fundamentally we're looking at a cost per outcome, right? And if you have to build on these additional layers of costs, from DMP to the SSP or the DSP or the various platforms that we'll start using, that the overall cost starts building, right? I mean, at least in my sort of previous life, I still remember we did a rough envelope, back of the envelope calculation. Out of every rupee spent, we realized about 20-25 paisa was actually going into tools and technologies, right? So the effective working media was significantly reducing, right? And I just want to, I know there've been improvement, but I just want anyone in the panel, as well, to kind of comment on the challenge of cost in this entire equation of driving programmatic.
Right, so I will take it. So see, I mean, one thing which I currently see as a challenge in the marketing way is you have it's a kind of assembled computer. You see, there's a different company provides hard disk, different company provides you the motherboard, different company provide you keyboard. There's nothing assembled here. So now, if you see the current scenario in the current digital marketing world, we have like more than 5,000 to 10,000 of different varieties of tools, and nothing talks to nothing, right? So now if I talk about, that if I'm doing a personalization, which is connected from the programmatic world, and now there has to be API or there has to be sync between the two different systems. And that itself goes into the IT system, IT cost, right? You need to have your tech guys involved in this process and make sure that that flows in. So there are like multiple process in that which involves, and then there are like, multiple platforms that you have to use it. Like some of the OTT platform recently came up with the marrying with the e-commerce. And so you are advertising on OTT, but you can target that consumer base from their e-commerce. So you are like more relevant to these guys. So you have like a scattered way of these tools and ammunition in the marketing hands. And it's like a multiple variety of things that you have to, it's like, you need to have 10 arms. You just cannot handle this thing with the two hands. And you need to have a smarter set of people in the team to manage all these things so nicely, because, all this data has to be collated, and data is very precious in this term, right? So because you have to have effective way of spending money and effective way of churning the data that, and making the decision making power. A lot of time we have an internal team meeting and people say that, yeah, I look into data, but then data tells you a lot of story, that, what is working, what is not working, where you should be investing your time, money, and energy, and where you should not be. So, and the tools and ammunitions are like very scattered, very vast. And I think there is an industry step out should happen, because I've been like, gone through so many demos of multiple big line company to the middle level and the low level, but everything goes into different direction. So, the one point is that if, from the platform side, if they're worried about their P&L, similarly, we have the challenges of our P&L, right? Because the cost you bomb for all these things. And as long as a marketer, it doesn't go in your head that what it is going to drive you back, what is the value that you're going to get back of it. So I think, that's what, one of the point that you earlier mentioned, that what is the challenges that currently industry or India, like, 80% in the budget in the US is spent on the programmatic, but why not in India? It's very early phase, because, somewhere it is the cost conscious in the mind of the brand holders, that, whether it's going to drive you result or it's just kind of wishy-washy game, right? So that's the kind of my take on this.
I agree. And I think if I have to add, most of these platforms are kind of designed, built for the Western world, and, charged to us in dollars than otherwise. I mean, not some of you. So just last 10 seconds, Gulrez, Prajol, can you just comment on that? And we will probably summarize and close this. I'm just conscious we're a few minutes over time already. On the cost, Gulrez, Prajol, what's your recommendations to people on the panel?
First and foremost, not necessarily all the platforms are built for the Western world. We are made in India. Talk to us. Number two, I think Archana already mentioned that for programmatic, the cost per reach out for her is the cheapest, right? So it depends on how you're evaluating that media. Are you looking at cost per reach out? If you're looking at cost per action, how have you structured the platform to enable the same outcome, right? Have you enabled the VT or not? And I'm glad Anand mentioned about the analogy about the assembled computer. It's like what you put in, what the output will be according to the same, right? So I would say there is enough and more platforms which are designed for India and works very well in the Indian market. Just evaluate the right player.
Yeah, good. Let's go ahead.
Enough and more advances being made to cut down on the cost using blockchain. So time will tell us. Number of companies are doing very effective actions on reducing the blockchain, reducing the cost part of it using the blockchain. So let's hope for the best.
Got it. Prajol, your comment on that?
I mean, the only thing, as a technology provider, I can't protest the technology costs. The only thing I will say is that it is true that there are all sorts of middlemen across the transactions typically who don't add value, and anyone who doesn't add value should be removed from the process. There's no there's no argument there. But there's also huge opportunity for technology providers, for platforms to add value and drive efficiencies as well. There's a lot more you can achieve by implementing a first-party data platform than you can do by continuing to pour money into, vendors and third-party data providers and extraneous tools that don't necessarily add value. So I think it's an important process of evaluating what exactly you're putting into this assembled computer. And sometimes it does make sense to spend a lot of money on a motherboard or a chip, because that has huge downstream consequences that do add value.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Final comment, quick question, and I just want everyone to respond to this. If I have to ask you for what percentage of, digital advertising spends will move to programmatic in next, 3 years. I mean, let me not even go beyond that. last report that I read, at least on the display side, the number's about 20% right now. And if you take out, some of the Facebooks and Amazons of the world, right? So from 20%, where do you think it'll finally end the next 3 years? Archana, let me start with you.
I think it'll go up to in the range of 45 to 50%. Yeah.
Got it. That's a good number in my mind already. Prachi, what do you think?
Likewise, I was actually hoping it should go up to 50-60%.
Yeah. Anand, what's your view on that? You're on mute. Anand, you're on mute.
Yeah, so one thing, my observation during this entire lockdown thing, I never came across any ad which was irrelevant to me. So that's a good progress, and that's a good sign for, Gulrez and Prajol, because it's a part of, because currently the budgets are tight and people want to spend it very judiciously. So I would say that maybe, people should go like, US standard 80%, go to that. But it's again on, how much time and energy these platforms are investing to educate and, bring these people on board. I wouldn't comment on the percentage. I'm quite hopeful, but it's not going to help me in any way.
All right, Prajal, what do you think?
I would concur. I would only caveat that by saying it's a function of what the outcomes are with identification of the landscape. If third-party cookies do see a demise over the next 18 months, as Google Chrome have promised, which is the bulk of the market, and there is no easy solution that comes up as a reliable substitute, then it does have the potential to dramatically impact programmatic spends, as do any changes to the Android identification landscape. So programmatic rides on the back of these IDs, on the back of identification, on the back of the SIGs tied to these IDs. If those see flux, and there is no consistency or stability there, then it's unclear to me how budgets will be impacted.
All right, Gulrez, what do you think?
Do you want me to tell you what I would like it to be, or what I think it will be?
What do you think? I know what the like number will look like. What do you think it'll eventually hit in next 3 years?
We are working very strongly in an area called connected TVs, right? And I believe the future of programmatic also, and the percentage that we're talking about, would be dependent on the growth of connected TVs in India. We've already seen in the US that the number has shoot up because of the connected TV on the back of the growth that's happening in OTT. I mean, imagine all of us, right? All of us would have subscribed or have one or the other, or at least 3 OTTs on our mobile phone. Imagine if we shift the OTTs on a bigger screen and we are able to target the user on a bigger screen on these OTTs and connected TVs. I would say that the percentage that you're asking for depends on the growth of the connected TVs, but I'm very hopeful on that number.
Got it. So let me just quickly, summarize the discussion and, kind of add a couple of my viewpoints as well. So I think, and always would agree with the lockdown and the acceleration of digital, the need for you to have systems and technologies which allow you to manage scale with a lot of data signals, which allow you to be more effective. That's definitely going to accelerate. So I don't think there's a question anymore about whether programmatic has arrived, or is it going to take, or is it the future, is it the current? It's here now. A lot of good people are leveraging it for competitive advantage, right? Rather, as we move forward, as more and more people want to differentiate themselves, but start building their own data, own platforms, I think the need for programmatic would even go up versus some of the walled gardens that exist, right? I think the challenges will continue to be around, sort of say, the ecosystem, education, agencies, marketers, understanding the whole ecosystem, and sort of say, demystifying it for everyone in the ecosystem, so that it's much easier for us to use it, right? I think as I always said, and we were having a discussion before the panel as well, I personally believe there's a lot of onus on people like Gulrez and Prajol to make sure that it's simplified, it's made easy, and it's made more cost effective, so that the adoption goes up, and we'll probably see even much better results as the scale of adoption goes up, right? So with that, I truly want to thank everyone on the panel. I wanted the discussion to be a little bit more heated, wasn't so much, but hopefully for the next time. But Archana, Prachi, Anand, Prajol, Gulrez, truly appreciate the time. Thanks for everyone who's joined as attendees. Thank you, Exchange for Media. Truly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you. Bye.